Hello and welcome back to the Striha Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Parker Striha, and on today's episode, we are going to be talking about Frank Gore and his recent retirement. I'm by no means a professional, but I do love talking about sports, so thank you for joining me. Franklin Gore was drafted by the San Francisco 49ers with the 65th overall pick in the 2005 NFL Draft out of the University of Miami. Now, you'd think that a guy that is one of the greatest running backs, or seen as one of the greatest running backs of all time, should have made it to the NFL easy, but he didn't. I mean, he tore his ACL twice during college within a span of only 19 months or 20 months, I think. So he tore his ACL, the same ACL nonetheless, twice in a span of less than 2 years. And you look at, obviously there's technology that helps athletes recover from those so they aren't necessarily career ending, but they can be. They can easily be a career ender, or they can hinder a professional athlete's career. And Gore had two of them in one knee, and he became one of the greatest running backs of all time. And I think that speaks volumes of him. But it's a little late because his retirement was, I think, a week or two ago. But I wanted to make a video about him and just kind of talk about his career, talk about his stats, and then kind of talk about his Hall of Fame resume. But like I said, Frank Gore, 2 ACL tears, less than 2 years in the same knee, but he made it to the NFL. So he was drafted to the San Francisco 49ers in the 2005 NFL Draft, and he spent 10 years there while becoming arguably their greatest running back of all time. In those 10 years, he amassed just over 11,000 rushing yards, 64 rushing touchdowns, 2,883 receiving yards, 110 receiving touchdowns, and he started 134 of 148 games that he was a part of. With those 14 games he didn't start coming in his rookie year. He also had 35 fumbles and 5 Pro Bowl appearances with 1 second-team All-Pro appearance. So, that right there, that alone, in my opinion, is probably a Hall of Fame career. Over 11,000 rushing yards, over 60 rushing touchdowns, almost 3,000 receiving yards, and over 100 receiving touchdowns. That's insane. And for a guy that, it's like I'm beating a dead horse here with the ACL stuff, but he tore his ACL twice, and he came out and put these numbers up in 10 years while also going to a Super Bowl with the 49ers. There's really others. I didn't watch a lot of football when he was with the 49ers just because I was still really young. But, I know Frank Gore was a monster in San Francisco. I didn't realize his receiving numbers were this good. 110 receiving touchdowns. I think I got that right. I might have accidentally messed that up a little bit, but actually I think I really did mess that up. I don't think he had 110 receiving touchdowns. That's a little much. I think he might have had 110 touchdowns total. So I don't really. That's kind of my mistake. I must have got my numbers messed up. Now that I'm looking at it, that is not right at all. But that's still extremely impressive for a running back. I didn't really think his numbers were going to be that good. Just forget about the receiving touchdown part. We're just going to slide past that. So after his time in San Francisco, he went to the Indianapolis Colts, where he spent the next 3 years of his career. He started every game he was a part of, and although his numbers weren't great, they were still all right considering he was getting into his 30s. He had just under 3,000 rushing yards, 13 rushing touchdowns, and 789 receiving yards to go along with 6 receiving touchdowns. That sounds like a really good number of receiving touchdowns, not 11 receiving touchdowns a year like I put in the first one. But we're going to slide past that. Was a good running back in Indianapolis. I kind of remember him more in Indianapolis than I do in San Francisco, just because this is more the time I was getting into the NFL and getting to where I am today as a fan. I still wasn't as big as I am now, but I remember him in Indianapolis. Really all there was to it. He was a really good running back there. And then after that, he kind of just bounced around the league for the next couple years. He spent a year in Buffalo where he was a yard shy of 600 rushing yards, to go along with 2 rushing touchdowns and 100 receiving yards. Jeepers creepers, my numbers are a little off today. He started half of the 16 games he was in, and then he went to Miami, so he went to another AFC East team where he spent a year there for 722 rushing yards, 0 rushing touchdowns, 124 receiving yards, and 1 receiving touchdown. And he also started 14 of 14 games that he appeared in. And then he made his final stop in 2020 where he played 1 year with the New York Jets. So his third AFC East team, he had 653 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, and 89 receiving yards, while starting 14 of a possible 15 games that he was in. So overall, in his 16-year career, he started 218 of 241 regular season games that he played in. He has 3,735 career rushing attempts, which is third all-time. He has 16,000 rushing yards on the dot, which is third all-time. And I mean, I can't believe that. I saw that and I thought it was kind of a typo. To have 16,000 on the dot is extremely impressive. Yeah, that's third all-time. 81 rushing touchdowns, which is 19th all-time. And then he has 3,985 career receiving yards to go along with 18 receiving touchdowns. He also has 19,985 career yards from scrimmage, which is 4th all-time. So he was only 15 yards away from 20,000 scrimmage yards in his career. He had 46 career fumbles, was a 5-time Pro Bowler, and was a 1-time second-team All-Pro. So with him retiring, now comes the discussion of, is he a Hall of Fame running back? And I mean, if you say no, I'm just going to be straight up, I'll be blunt about it. I think you're an idiot. If you say Frank Gore is not a Hall of Fame quarterback, yes, he doesn't have an Offensive Player of the Year or an MVP or a Super Bowl, but considering he is third all-time in rushing attempts, rushing yards, top 20 in rushing touchdowns, and 4th all-time in scrimmage yards, those stats alone should put him in the Hall of Fame. But then you look at a storyline, and I think that is extremely important nowadays when considering someone for the Hall of Fame is a story. He tore both of it. He tore one ACL twice in 2 years, and then he went on to become the league's third all-time leading rusher. And I think that story alone could also put him in the Hall of Fame, because you look at people whose careers have ended or been just pretty much not cut short because that's pretty much ended, but ended or their production completely went downhill after an ACL tear, and he tore the same one twice and then went on to have this career. I think he's a Hall of Fame running back. I don't really think there's really any argument that can be made against that, but that's really all there is to it. I just wanted to make a quick video about Frank Gore, kind of highlight his career stats and congratulate him on a great NFL career. I wish him nothing but the best in his retirement. I would have liked to see him play one more year, go back to San Francisco for maybe just play one more year there. Doesn't have to play a lot, but just to have his final career snaps be in that San Francisco 49er uniform. But it's not how it worked out. He did sign a 1-day contract to retire as a 49er. But yeah, I would have liked to see him at least sign for one game, get one snap, and then call it quits. But I mean, that would have been kind of a storybook ending for Frank Gore's career. But he's kind of the end of an era. He's one of the last great running backs of that 2000s decade. And I think he's kind of passing the torch on to some of these younger running backs who are going to carry the league for the next 10, 15 years. But as always, I'm your host, Parker Striha, and this has been the Striha Sports Podcast. Our random sport fact of the day is that former Arizona Cardinal Larry Fitzgerald has the second most receptions in NFL history with 1,432. As always, thank you for tuning in, and don't forget to hit that notification bell for whenever a new video gets posted.